the Aorus Fo48u. It went on sale pretty recently, and you may have seen Linus LTT did a video about it a little while ago, claiming that he found his home setup monitor. Like this was going to be it, and almost 8 months to a year later, it went on sale. It was retailing for $1,400, and then it went all the way down to $799. It is from Gigabyte. It is using the same LG panel. As far as I know, it is using the same LG panel that you can find in the C1 or CX. I'm not sure which iteration it is, but it is a beautiful OLED monitor, and it has all the same qualities that you would get from it. 1 millisecond response time, black or gray to gray, vibrant colors, inky blacks, all the stuff that you would want out of that, except it's massive. And I've been using it for a couple of months now. I'm gonna probably do a file video on it, but this thing, I can't overstate how much this thing has kind of revitalized my enjoyment of games. Like if you've been playing something, you kind of get into a rut where you're like, nothing is interesting. You have 600 games in your Steam catalog and nothing is interesting. But for whatever reason, just the immersion level, and it's for full context here, I don't have a key light on right now. I just have my monitor in front of me. So it's just edge to edge. My complete periphery is just filled with this screen. So I've just been enjoying playing all these games just with my entire field of view just filled with screen. It's the only thing I can really compare it to is using a VR headset. It's a different kind of experience. And I kind of credit this monitor for kind of just making me want to play video games again. It's just awesome. So yeah, I'll probably just do a follow-up video on that at some point just to talk about it. But
have you had any complaints so far?
Complaints?
I've only heard you say good things about this thing.
Not really, because a lot of people complained about it being a little exhausting for your eyes. Even at the distance I'm sitting, which is probably I'm pretty close to this thing.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of people are using it in a dark environment, or they're trying to stream with it, and they also have the key lights on, which I noticed that LTT actually has 2 full-size key lights on. I feel like that's just going to exhaust you. You sit in front of all that light, anything will do that to you.
Yeah.
But I haven't really found anything to complain about. And there's been a ton of warnings about how it can experience screen burn in. Now, granted, we're only two months into having this thing. But I've had the LG CX for 2 years, and I use that every day, and I haven't seen any kind of burn in on that either. So, I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but if you're careful, I don't feel like you have too much to worry about. I guess the only real complaint would be it's huge. You need the desk space, and I am just about out of desk space. So, but I'm more than happy with it right now. This thing rules. I don't know if I would recommend it at its full price, but if you ever see it drop, it goes below 1,000 or is around that, totally pick that thing up. It's probably going to be the most affordable OLED monitor, gaming monitor that you can get your hands on, because you're using one right now. You're using a QD OLED monitor that you really, really want to keep.
Yeah. So
it has the same benefits, but it's better. It's better in every way, but there's similar benefits to why you would want to use it, right?
Yeah. So I was this close to getting the Aorus as well, and just missed the sale. And so I ended up getting a C1 OLED for our house, because that was kind of what we needed to upgrade anyway, instead of putting a giant 48-inch TV in my gaming space. But I have been working on a review of the Alienware A32DW something or another, the QD OLED. It's really cool. The on-screen display stuff is the firmware is really buggy. Apparently they released a firmware update, but you have to send it back to get an update. And so that's been a whole, I'm not doing that in my review cycle. So that part's not been great, but overall, I've experienced a similar thing where for the first time I consider HDR playable, which is awesome. I've been trying HDR since day one, since I had a monitor that supported it, and on every LCD that I had and etc. It looks bad. And on Windows 10 it was pretty bad. On Windows 11 it's a lot better. Auto HDR, chef's kiss. MCC, Splitgate, older Battlefield titles that don't give the manual toggle, that don't always work. Like having auto HDR just make sure everything runs in HDR is.
This is exactly the thing
so
that
nice.
I loved about mine. Because mine basically was tuned to be a TV, and then they stripped out all the TV stuff to make it a good monitor.
Yeah.
But it's still a beautiful HDR panel. I got a Samsung Odyssey G5 sitting on the floor over here, technically HDR compatible. Everything looks awful when you run it in HDR mode. This thing looks awesome. It's probably the first time I've actually done HDR gaming on PC like consistently.
Yeah. I was the same way. I got the G7, the 1440p240. I was like, I'm finally going to buy me an expensive gaming monitor and upgrade. I really am not a fan of that thing, especially after using the QD OLED. I'm like, I don't know that I want to go back now.
You can't.
I don't know that.
Once you've made the switch from LCD, it's impossible.
Obviously,
I just can't.
Obviously, there's still budgetary constraints, but like, especially once they go on sale, if you're spending $500 or more on an LCD panel, there is zero advantage to getting an LCD over an OLED at this point. Especially, like, everyone tries to justify still spending money on LCD over OLED for like high refresh rates and stuff, but the response times, as I covered in my CRT versus LCD video, the response times of an LCD, even at higher refresh rates, are still lower than still higher than an OLED, which means even at a lower refresh rate, like my ultra wide only runs at like 175 hertz, it's still lower input lag and thus more responsive than a 240 hertz LCD monitor. So you're not actually gaining anything there. And yeah, I'm never buying an LCD again unless it's like a cheapo thing for a family member. Like OLED is 100% the way to go. I've also been worried about burn-in, both because the monitor has the little on-screen display for G-Sync where it shows the frame rate, so it's just like at least the outline of it's always kind of static, which is kind of nervous to me.
Is it like a neon color or like
it's gray? So it should probably be okay.
It'll be all right. Yeah, because I originally had a neon green one through all of the different overlays, and I switched it to gray, and I don't think it's gonna be a problem. Dr. Fu has a pretty good question in the YouTube chat. Is it that HDR just isn't wide supported yet? Like, do I have anything that's HDR? I would say it's because a lot of the panels that are out there that you can get that are on the affordable range, they are just barely supporting it. So when you flip it to HDR mode, the whole screen just goes dim and it doesn't look as good as it should. Like, you lose all the benefits and all the reason that you would want to play in HDR. Whereas the panels that we're talking about right now, they can actually handle it. They can get super bright. You can get those colors that you want. I think that's maybe into it. Maybe there's some other reasons too, but I feel like that's probably the reason. It's just it's just barely supported by these other monitors.
So the problem for me, and actually this was one of our things, is I've also been trying to make HDR videos, and that has also been a nightmare. HDR is messy because of the technical limitations on the hardware, as well as the million different standards that there are for displaying it. But like on the hardware side, an LCD monitor is never going to be capable of properly displaying HDR due to the contrast that it needs that LCD panels just can't really achieve without a lot of gimmicky tweaks, as well as the individual, everyone talks, like used to, the big conversation was about full aware local dimming. The dimming zones, because you need, like, especially for computer use, this is way more relevant for computer use than TV use, but like if you're moving your cursor around a dark scene on an OLED, you just see your cursor moving around on a dark scene. On an LCD in HDR, it's like I put on like a massive bloom filter, because it has, everything around it is lighting up for that too. And I have
like feathered blur on it.
Yep. And I have two of what were considered the only worthwhile HDR monitors for PC that were HDR 1000. They're Dell's, the UP2718Qs. They were $1,400 each at the time, and I still don't like using them in HDR. And compared to an OLED, they are still nowhere near the same thing. And it's both because of the contrast required, the different lighting zones and things like that, as well as just the crappiness of the panels. Because most LCD panels claiming HDR support only go up to 400 nits. HDR is typically mastered at 1000 nits. And what the nits measurement is the max brightness. It's not the brightness that the whole image is, but the max that a part can get, which is important for that contrast. So say, like, on a scale, if this is the HDR scale, this full pin, then if your monitor only goes up to less than halfway, you're getting less than half of the actual contrast, and thus less than half of the actual HDR. And it's in some monitors, it actually looks worse than they do in SDR, which kind of defeats the purpose. There are a couple I reviewed a BinQ one that had some HDRI modes that put on like cinematic profiles and stuff, and those look stellar. But in most cases, it just doesn't look good.
Not to send you down another tangent, but another good question from the chat. This one over from Twitch. So, dude asks, does MCC on PC have HDR? I've been wanting to play it in HDR, but never seen the option. I believe you mentioned that it's auto HDR.
Yeah,
now,
so it doesn't have a manual toggle. A lot of games now launch without a toggle, which is really frustrating because on Windows you need manual toggles for anything or things don't work right. But it works with auto HDR, and so that's always been the big thing is on Windows 10 for me, even for normal HDR desktop use, HDR has been a mess. It's never worked great. Switching to Windows 11, normal HDR stuff seems to work significantly better because they put in some updates for display handling, and then auto HDR, like it was already great on Xbox, but like it is the coolest thing in the world on Windows 11. Like seeing older PC games and games that should support HDR, like MCC or I don't know, Battlefield 1 that don't have a toggle for it, render in native HDR. I have only had an issue with one game using auto HDR, and it was Battlefield 1 or 5. No, I think it was 1.
Yeah, and so that would just work across your entire PC catalog, right?
Yeah, every game. Because it basically hijacks into the DirectX rendering process. So, like, there may be some specific
I wonder
APIs.
If that would work with, like, PS3. Like, PS3 emulation.
Probably. I feel like they'd be able to get it to work. They're getting everything else to work, like the FSR.
You need to ask Alex Battaglia.
Yeah. But yeah, the only concern to have with auto HDR is there are certain games that don't, like if they're not built with HDR in mind, they don't like have flags to not show you like a full screen of white. And so playing one of the Battlefield games, when I get flashbanged, I genuinely have to like cover my eyes because the entire screen goes full brightness 100% white. And so I'm literally getting flashbanged, which is like immersion, but also, you know, not ideal. But someone keeps saying someone tested auto HDR in their latest vid and it's poo. Well, okay, I've been using it for 4 months now and it's been fantastic. So congrats. Like, I have had zero issues with it, other than sometimes capturing it doesn't look entirely perfect since it's not like running the normal HDR mode, but like I've had zero games give me issues with it, and the only complaint that I've had has been the, like I said, getting flashbanged is a little bit more immersive than you might be used to.